Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am delighted to be joined by Brian and Lawrence for an impromptu Saturday bulletin. How are you doing, guys?
Great, absolutely brilliant. Nice sunny day off, not much to do in the house, football's on later. Can't complain.
Well, this is the thing. We're going to continue with the bulletins throughout the pre-season. Now, the actual headline tells you 38 days until the qualifier, so there's plenty to discuss between now and then. 106 days after the departure of Neil Lennon, we announced the arrival of Ange Postecoglou. He has been on the subject header for the last 2 weeks, I think, on A Celtic State of Mind, and on various other platforms. We're going to be talking about the new gaffer, but everything else that this rebuild entails. Now, first and foremost, Brian, you've had a bit of time to digest the fact that Ange, he's not yet in the building, but he's got the job. He's addressed the Celtic fans. He calls himself the boss. Now, in the last week or so, we've spoken to Jared from Celts Down Under, who gave us an Australian perspective on his time over there and managing the national side. We then spoke yesterday to Dan from the Japanese Times, who scared the life out of us with some of the things he was telling us about Ange over in Japan. We're trying to get a balanced view. Do you understand, do you appreciate the kind of fears and the concerns amongst a lot of the Celtic fans with this appointment, Brian?
Absolutely. Like any aspect of life, it's fear of the unknown, isn't it? We don't really know what we're getting. We're either getting Brendan Rodgers football or we're getting Tony Mowbray football. I think that's going to be the extreme. What I've been sort of digesting, I've been looking at a lot of what people have said about him in interviews, and the commonalities across maybe 5, 6, 7 different interviews over various years are all kind of the same. He's determined, plays good football, it's his way or the highway. He's not the strongest defensively, and things take time. So part of that I'm excited by, as I'd said last time I was on, I'm excited that he's coming in. It's going to be something new, something sort of revolutionary, hopefully. I think that he's going to come in and it's going to be, Ange's team. He'll decide. I like the fact he calls himself the boss and he makes players call him boss. I think that's all right. I'm on board with that. Where I'm concerned is the defensive side of things and the timing side of things. I think we'll probably talk more later about the timing side of things and expectations, but that's my big concerns, is the defensive naivety, because maybe domestically we can get away with that, but we will get handed our backsides in Europe if we go in there with naivety. And so I understand both. I'm still quite excited about things, but I totally understand why people are nervous.
This is the thing, I'm looking at the experience I've had as a Celtic supporter and all the various managerial appointments that I've experienced, going right back to the departure, I guess, of Billy McNeil first time round. Vaguely remember Davy Hay, Big Billy comes back, I remember that vividly. And then after that, the whole procession, some of whom were really kind of high risk. Liam Brady comes in, he's a rookie manager, massive risk. And then we go into the doldrums. Everybody of a certain vintage will remember it, Lawrence, going through Lou Macari. There was a period there where Frank Connor managed for a few games, Joe Jordan managed for a game, Billy Stark took over when Tommy left. And then another couple of high risk appointments. Some worked out, Wim Jansen, some didn't. But for me, when I'm looking at Ange Postecoglou, and I've said this time and time again, it's not a disrespectful attitude that I've got against Ange. I think the most similar appointment that we have had at any time in the club's history is probably Ronnie Deila. Would you agree with that? And do you think, Lawrence, that it's all about the timing and that's why the concerns are rising to the surface here?
Definitely agree, the most similar Deila. It is a bit to do with timing, but it's also to do with what other changes going on at the club. Are we really changing anything? Have we just put in another cheap option manager? Are we going to actually change the structures at the club? I think that there's huge concerns about. Well, Lenny's came out and said, backroom staff, they weren't his own. I don't know any Celtic supporters that thinks staff should be foisted upon a manager. It didn't appear to work under Lenny. But I think there's a whole range of things. We didn't do the 10, but for me, it's structurally, where's the club going? If it, they were talking bringing in Howe and giving him his own backroom staff and his own director of football. If that was the right structure then, why is it not the right structure under Ange? If that's the right structure for a football club, why is it now changed? Or has it changed? I don't know. Are they going to bring in a director of football? Who knows? Celtic's communications was somewhat lacking, isn't it? We don't know if they're looking for one or not looking for one.
Well, this was the thing. It was a major restructure, Brian, and we heard about part of this restructure being a director of football, part of the Eddie Howe deal being that he was selecting his own director of football. That surprised quite a lot of Celtic fans. Fergal Harkin had been discussed in relation to other managers who might have been coming in. All of a sudden, we have an appointment of a manager and no mention of a director of football, no mention of a head of recruitment, for example. In your mind, do you think that Celtic have changed direction here at the last minute and said, right, well, we're all in with Eddie Howe and all his staff, including a director of football. However, we're going to play it a little bit safer here. We're bringing in Ange. I mean, from what we're hearing here, there's actually been mixed reports. Some people are saying that John Kennedy and Strachan will be part of his backroom team. Others are saying that he's not. Do you think there's been a huge shift in direction here?
I think yes and no. I actually think they're going back to what their original plan would have been. I think when they were going to get rid of Lennon and Lowell was leaving, they sort of decided to modernise the club, as they keep saying. And I think they were going to get a director of football, head of recruitment, sporting director, canteen director, whatever you call them. I think that was the plan. I think when Eddie Howe was going to come in, he basically said, I want my version of all of that. And I think that's why guys like Harkin and stuff are sort of put to the side because they're relying on Howe. Now that that's not happened, I think they're actually going back to that. I think getting Ange in is the first stage to try and rebuild the squad and start to stabilise the playing side of things because that's the most time sensitive. The reason I think it's going to take longer than a season for the rebuild because I think they're going to have to recruit a director of football, head of recruitment, sports scientists, videos, all that modernisation over the course of this season. And I think Angie's going to basically steady the playing side while they work in the background to do everything else. So I think they've still got a plan in place. Obviously they're secret girls and I'm not telling us. I've got my own theory about the director of football, as I'd mentioned before. I think Mark Lowell has got a lot to do with it. I think that's where the City link comes from. I don't think it was Harkin. I think it's been Lowell Jr. who's been responsible. And I think there's a lot of communication through him. Might not be him that takes the job, but I think they're leaning on him for a lot of these things. I think there's so much change, so much restructure still to come. I don't think they've deviated from it. I just think they've had to basically almost stall it for the moment.
Yeah. You've mentioned the personnel there, and I wanted to go through that. A few weeks ago, Colin and I did a very similar bulletin on a Saturday, and we went through the entire playing staff, Brian, and we had a kind of brutal view on it. Who's going to stay? Who's going to go? How many players will we need to recruit this pre-season? And it ranged from 12 to 18 players, and we looked at the entire squad. I'm talking all the young players, all the fringe players who might have been leaving Celtic Park. And then, even back then, we're thinking, well, this is a major rebuild just on personnel on the playing side of things. That's before you start talking about, as you say, the dietitians, sports scientists, physiotherapists and everything else that comes with the staff that a manager normally has now with a big football club. And we are calling this one of the biggest jobs in world football. That was part of the statement. So if that is the case, we could, and I'm going to run through the areas of the playing staff and we'll have a look at a kind of idea as to how big this rebuild's going to be. With 38 days to the first qualifier, there's no way, I think, that we will be able to replace everybody that's leaving. There is going to be a patchwork operation, I think, for the first qualifier. And how frustrating is that, after 9 years of domestic domination, that we're still patching a team together and particularly a defence together for the first European game. So what we'll do is we'll run through each of the areas of the park. Starting off, I mean, this is interesting. Yeah, we'll touch on the Euros a wee bit here. One of Scotland's goalkeepers, Craig Gordon. We keep talking Lawrence Conley around the Fraser Forster issue, Forster leaving. I think that Craig Gordon leaving was part of the fact that we thought Forster was coming back in. He is still performing at a high level. Meanwhile, we've got 3 goalkeepers that you could say are part of the first team squad, in Barkas, Bain and Hazard. How is that looking for us going into the first qualifier? There's still a question mark around Barkas, whether or not he's going to make a return to Greece. If that's the case, Scott Bain's your number 1 for the first qualifier in the Champions League, isn't he?
Well, if I was to look at the 3 of them, ordinarily you kind of go, well, Bain, what's his future in the club? For me, he's never first choice. Or should never be first choice. We don't think he's got quality. The age he's at, we're not going to develop him. We've got Hazard who could be developing. God knows with the Greek boy, if he's a goalkeeper, never mind if he's come back. The last couple of games it kind of looked okay. The Lions get a performance out of him. Was it settling in? Was it COVID? I don't know. But yeah, it's a worry getting in for me for any of those 3 as first choice keeper. Whether the Greek boy stays because we don't know enough about him. Young Hazard, he looks a wee bit suspect when he's coming for balls. Doesn't command his box well, and maybe he's needing kind of game time to solve that. And for me, Bain's just not off the standard. So, don't worry that position.
It is a concern, Brian. I'll come to yourself now. I look at we've got 3 goalkeepers. We'll come on to the Colts as well, because Lawrence has left us just so he can get rid of that helicopter sound that's coming through his mic. We'll look at the Colts as well, because I think that's going to be really relevant when we're assessing, or when Ange Postecoglou is assessing the squad. He knows that there's going to have to be a Colts team, and there's going to be fringe players who will be part of that team. So we'll come into that in a moment or so. And I know that there are other goalkeepers at the club, but going into 4 competitions, you would expect to have 3 goalkeepers. And I still think that at this stage, isn't it a concern that we're still wondering who the first choice is? I mean, Hazard, he came in, he played a massive part in the Scottish Cup win, which sealed the quadruple treble. People were critical of at least one of the goals that he lost in the game, but he done so well in the penalty shootout. He was the first choice. Then Barkas apparently was the first choice. Neil Lennon came out and said he was his first choice goalkeeper, then he was dropped again. So last season there was game time for 3 different goalies, yet I don't think anyone's any clearer as to who's the number 1. What's your take on that? Should we try and cut our losses on Barkas, bring a new keeper in?
Yeah, well, in terms of the 3 keepers, Bain shouldn't have been anywhere near a Celtic side to begin with. For me, he's bang average at best. Hazard, I think, is actually the best at the 3. I think you can get something out of him. He's got a bit of physicality, but like Fraser Forster at first, actually. Remember, Big Forster was absolutely awful at crosses when he first came in. Remember?
And he couldn't kick. He couldn't kick a ball.
He couldn't kick a ball. Hazard could develop into that. Barkas, for me, apart from his shot stopping ability, which we've not seen enough of, he doesn't inspire any sort of confidence. I mean, I'm a little guy, I'm like 5'6". If I was a striker against Barkas, I'd be comfortable knocking him around. It just doesn't look like he's going to come and command a box to me. My only slight concern is that Postecoglou doesn't seem too concerned that his keepers actually been good keepers. He likes them to come out with the ball at their feet and be a sweeper keeper, which apparently is Barkas' strength. So I think he will be there, and I think he'll get a chance. Whether he should, no, for me, I would switch him out. But, the thing about who's going to be the first choice keeper, it really depends on Ange. I mean, Neil Lennon didn't seem to have an idea who he was playing, who he wasn't playing, who he was told to play probably. So we don't really know who Ange sees as first choice. My feeling is it would be Barkas, just because I think he fits the description of the keepers Postecoglou likes.
Yeah, you're right. So playing from the back, like the sweeper keeper, which incidentally didn't suit how we were playing last season, which is maybe one of the reasons why his Celtic career didn't take off. Now, a bigger concern even than that, in my eyes, is the defensive situation. So I've had a look at the squad, the wider squad, and I think this is as wafer thin a Celtic defence as I've ever seen. Now, we've already heard that Chris Ayer obviously on international duty. He sees it as an opportunity to be a wee bit more free talking than on the official club channels. And he's spoken about his desire to leave this pre-season. What I'm unhappy with is the kind of fees that I'm hearing. I know it's just speculation, Brian, but you've heard some of the fees around Ayer, who obviously had been linked, and the link is no longer an active one, previously with AC Milan. Look, Salt and Kenny are way back to their respective clubs, and we wish them all the best because they weren't going to have a career at Celtic Park. And we know the situation with Jack Hendry, currently out there playing for Scotland in the Euros. It's not been confirmed yet, but we're expecting the Ostend deal to go ahead, and they will probably flip that and make a few quid on the back of Jack Hendry's performances over the last year, and potentially in this tournament as well. I've got a question mark around Ralston. Not quite sure if he's still in the building or if we're going to terminate the last year of his deal to allow him to go and speak out to other clubs. O'Connor's coming back in, finds himself the first choice right back after 40 odd appearances with Tranmere. We've got Welsh, who's got some vital experience this season or the season past. Julien's out until October. Taylor at left back. And then you start looking at players like Bolingoli and Leo Held. Leo Held, a 17-year-old who, fair enough, he's got experience in the Scottish Premiership. But really, if you're looking at the two centre-halves being Welsh and Held, it shows you just how wafer-thin our defence is. That's before we look at Beaton. I've got him in the midfielders, probably much to the annoyance of Kevin Graham, who says that he is now a centre-half. I've still got him in the midfield. But if you try and have a look at the defence then, in 38 days' time, and I'm going to come to yourself, Lawrence, in just a second, we could be looking at a defence of Leo Connor, who's never kicked a ball for Celtic Football Club, Stephen Welsh, Near Beaton, and left back Taylor, if he's back and fit from the Euros. That is, for me, the weakest Celtic defence I can remember, and I've seen a few weak defences at Celtic Park.
I wouldn't have any worries about Taylor. Well, the problem is, the other three are the first team starters, and I would say are far from it. Welsh didn't have a bad season, but I wouldn't have said he had a good one. I wouldn't have said he's nailed down a first team start position. Right back, as you said, Connor's not kicked the ball. He was highly rated at Man United before he came up. He's been at Tranmere, but he's been playing defensive mid as well as right back. Mm-hmm. But Yeld, it looked okay. The
next Van Dijk?
It looked okay in patches of games. I don't, not in full 90 minutes so far. So you've touched on, he's young and needs to learn. But Jesus, would you want him defending 40 million?
Well, this is the big question, and we'll go on to the swing in finances from Celtic Park to Ibrox, and this is how it's so important to get our act together and actually have a team on a park that is going to give us a fighting chance. Now, there are, and I understand and I appreciate there are other players, but I've put them into the Colts category, Brian, because we're going to be talking about the Colts. Guys, maybe like you and Otu, who had a good spell, a very good spell at Clyde last season, 17-year-old. I don't see him being part of the first team at Celtic at this stage, and I would expect him to form part of the wider Colts squad. So it's pretty concerning when you look at that defence that either for a backup or for a first choice, we need a right back, a left back, and two centre halves.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things. I have in various times over the past month or so sketched out what I think the squad's going to look like and what we need. Now, what we need is essentially 11 new players. I think we'll be lucky to get that. I might come on to this point later, but I think that the club's preparing for downsizing the looks of it. Mm-hmm. I think we will have to recruit in positions, but I think overall they're going to cut the squad down considerably. So I think you see a lot of bodies leaving. To go back to the actual question, we need at least two centre halves. Although Julian's going to be coming back, you're probably looking at Julian and someone else as your first choice with Henry, and the other centre half is your second choice partnership, and Helge is your sort of cover for any injuries. You need two centre halves minimum. Left back, will Bolingoli stay? Postecoglou's no bias against him. He didn't do it into his season, so will he stay or will he be told to punt him? I don't know, but I think that'd be a straight replacement. It's covered anyway. I think you probably get good money for Bolingoli. So actually, left back, I'm not too worried about. Right back, now that's a concern. We haven't had a good right back at Celtic since Mikael Lustig.
100%.
I mean, we've just not. Before him, Adam Matthews, maybe. Leo Connor, I think, can probably do a job, actually. I think he's actually quite high rated, and, you know, obviously you only watch some highlights on YouTube, but he's got good crossing ability. He looks athletic boy, so I think his cover that's all right, but I think you need to invest in a real solid, strong right back. Actually, given the way Postecoglou is supposed to play, that could be the position you have to spend the most money on. If you're looking at, you know, the two full-back areas,
yeah.
A lot of pace, a lot of crosses in. So the investment, I think the money that we spend will all go to the defence, which then leaves a worry for the rest of the team, which we'll get into later. But I think, yeah, 2 centre-backs minimum, a real top-quality right-back, and possibly a left-back as cover.
I mean, I think right back to the old fanzine days and the old quip, does he play left back? Because we used to always struggle for left backs. And then all of a sudden we had a couple that fared us pretty well in Izzy Geary and then Kieran Tierney. Since Tierney's left, and I know Lawrence a big fan of Greg Taylor, and I'm not criticising Taylor, but we really haven't had that first pick left back. Taylor's been in and out the side, you know, like Salt comes in. You would think on big money coming in from AC Milan, didn't work out. And you're right about the right backs, Brian. I mean, since Lustig, you've had Toljan, who was an €8 million player that Borussia Dortmund had spent big money on, didn't work out. Maurice Bayer, who had played at a high level, thought he was a good crosser of the ball, I've got to say, but, you know, it didn't work out for him. And then Kenny comes in, even Frimpong, you know, in terms of his defensive ability, and I know that he's gone on and had a big money move elsewhere. So huge investment in the defensive areas. I've seen a lot of talk around, all right, well, Ange Postecoglou's Australian, so's Tommy Rogic. That means that we've got a new player in Tom Rogic, and he's going to perform tremendously well as soon as Ange is in the building. And we all know it doesn't really work like that. But when we look at the midfield, El Younousi, there's not really been much chat around El Younousi. I think a few months ago there was talk about a £5 million option to buy him. It's gone a bit quiet. In Cham, there's talk about his last year, his deal getting ripped up and him going to AEK Athens. Ryan Christie looking to impress in the Euros, could be on his way out. And the chat around Marian Sved is that he could be leaving as well. So there's another 4 players away from the squad, leaving us with Soro, McGregor, Turnbull, Tommy Rogic, Johnson, Forrest, Shaw and Beaton. And again, it's leaving us wafer thin. Now, I've had a wee look at Liam Shaw's performances last season for Sheffield Wednesday. He's either utilised as a central midfielder, Lawrence, or an attacking midfielder. I'm looking at Mikey Johnson, who didn't get a huge amount of game time. I've not mentioned Dembele, young Dembele, who came in for a couple of appearances at the end of last season. Again, where are we strengthening here? Because, I mean, Brian says we need a whole new defence. We certainly strengthened in the midfield areas, and particularly in the wide areas, don't we?
Yeah, Larry was on record saying he wanted 2 wingers in on loan to cover because we had Johnston and Forrest at that time, and who knows if Mike is going to make it. You know, James has got his injury programmes. If that's what we're going for a full season with, we're not going to get a full season out of both of them. Don't think we get a full season out of 2 of them put together. So, you know, we're definitely going to need strength and wide. We also got in midfield, Luke O'Connell's coming back as well, isn't he? So we've a large number of kind of in the centre. Do we have a large number that's good enough that would count as first team starters? Turnbull, McGregor in the centre as starters. You think Forrest and his fits get positioned nailed down and wide? Anyone else that's really pushing that you're thinking he should be starting definitely?
There's a few.
Aren't they?
There's a few players, Brian, who have got either first team experience at Celtic or elsewhere. Luke O'Connell being one that Lawrence quite rightly mentions. And they're at an age, I mean, where's Connell now? 21, Luke O'Connell. You've got Scott Robertson, played for the first team, 19. He went out to Doncaster, went out to Gillingham. Kerr McInroy, 20-year-old, he's gone out to Dunfermline. Jonathan Afolabi, 21. I mean, around about that age, you're thinking, well, you know, he's either in the first team or his Celtic career's probably coming to a close. And you've also got Ewan Henderson at 21, younger brother of Liam. These are the type of players that are probably a year or two too old for the Colts team. I mean, the Colts team, I'm guessing at that level, you're probably looking mainly under 18 level. I certainly wouldn't expect many of the players to be over the age of 20. And a lot of these kind of younger fringe players who've been out on loan, Brian, are at that age. I mean, if they're not part of the first team, it's probably best for their own careers if they move on and get first team football elsewhere. Is there any from those names that you think might be part of the first team squad going forward? We've heard Ange Postecoglou talking about the importance of youth and developing the youth system.
I think probably Scott Robertson's the one that sort of stands out. I think he's a good season on loan. I think he was kind of on the fringes of the first team before he went. He's sort of holding midfielder. He's a bit of a presence about him. I think he might come in. But see, just in terms of numbers we need for that midfield. So, again, I think it's going to be maximum 2 players for a position. I think they'll really streamline the squad. So you're talking Turnbull and Rogic in that number 10. Mm-hmm. And your 4 sort of box-to-box or sitting midfielders are going to be Sorrell, McGregor, the big boy Shaw, who's an unknown quantity, and then maybe one of the loanees coming back. So, in terms of the wide players, I think you'll have Dembele and Forrest on the right, Johnson on the left. So you need a left winger, at least, or someone who can play both sides, and you probably need a holding midfielder with a bit of presence. So that's another 2. My worry is that they'll see that as a luxury. My worry is they'll say, well, Sorrell and McGregor can probably do it. They'll stay fit for most of the season. We don't really need to strengthen anymore. And I think that's my worry. If we do spend a lot of money at the back, it's going to get neglected mid out the front, because the idea is, well, Turnbull, McGregor, Sorrell, that's a really good trio. And it is. But they're also, apart from McGregor, Sorrell and Turnbull are still young guys. Mm-hmm. They're going to be inconsistent. They might get injuries. And if you're playing in 4 competitions, as you say, hopefully 4 competitions, you're going to need more. But that's why I think that some of the academy guys will get drafted in just as cover. I don't see them buying anyone they think is just cover. I think that they'll have their 2 players for a position, and if someone gets injured, they'll just grab one of the kids in and put them in, because they'll not see it as a priority. That's just my opinion. But again, long-winded answer, but I think you're looking at a holding player with a bit of presence, because McGregor and Sorrell are too small physically for me in that role. And I think you're needing a left winger. I don't think Johnson's consistent enough, and I don't think it will be, if I'm honest.
No, my biggest disappointment, I think, upon his return, is he was at that stage, I think, Brian, where you remember Christie going out to Aberdeen, and he came back and he had transformed physically. You know, he was one of these guys, a skinny guy, who had gone out, he'd come in from Inverness, gone back out there, come back and away to Aberdeen, and he made a massive impression with the Dons. But when he comes back, he's put on 1.5 stone in weight, and probably all muscle, and you could tell. And his performances improved, drastically, dramatically when he came back. We'll remember the semi-final at Murrayfield, but after that, he became a pivotal member of the Celtic squad. I was expecting something similar, I guess, with Mikey, and I know he's quite slight, but he's at that age now where, he's been away with a long-term injury, and it might have given him an opportunity to really develop that physical aspect of his game. Is he too lightweight? You compare him to El Yunusi, for example. I know El Yunusi divided opinion, but he had the physical presence, and I think a lot of his goals as a result of that were probably aerial duels that he won. I mean, there was plenty others that he didn't, and he should have scored far more with his head, but he was a presence and he was an attacking force. I don't see that. I think Mikey Johnston's got the jinkiness, he's got the tricks and all that kind of stuff. Very entertaining player on his game, but there was that opportunity for me, I felt, within the last season or two, for him to really come back strong. I've not seen it yet, and it's a bit disappointing, because I love seeing guys like Mikey and Jamesy coming through and being our first picks. Stephen James comes in. Welcome back to the show, Stephen. Ralston's still on Celtic's books. He is, and I just think, he's a guy that Brendan Rodgers rated and regarded very, very highly. I think he was rewarded with a 5-year deal, wasn't he? Following the performances against the likes of Neymar at PSG. 5-year deal. He's played very little football since then. So we're looking at a lot of these positions where we're thinking, right, we need at least one in that area, maybe 2. But as you say, Brian, that might result in us bringing in 12 players. And to actually try and get a mould of 12 players is going to be nigh on impossible. We've seen how difficult it was last season with 6. That brings us up to the attacking options. of which there are very, very few. I'll come to yourself first, Lawrence. It would appear that Griffiths' contract has ended. There was a wee bogus tweet came out and disappeared just as quickly from his brother. We knew that his deal was up on the 31st of May. No doubt he'll go to a club such as Aberdeen or Hibs and be a revelation with them. You know, he's going to score 20 goals a season, Lee Griffiths, in the Scottish League. But that actually leaves us, if Edouard leaves and we're expecting him to, with Bayo and a Yeti. So when you're looking at that, and I mean, I don't know if the plans are to bring Bayo back, Lawrence, we need another couple of strikers as well.
Without doubt, I mean, anything I've seen a Bayo in French second division, I wouldn't be bringing him back as a first choice striker for Celtic. You know, it's try and get some money back in him. I think that was another player that was bought without the manager's involvement, which hopefully is something we're going to stop. A Yeti, you know, first 4 games, 5 games, 3 or 4 goals.
He looked apart in the first half a dozen games, Lawrence, absolutely.
Effort's questionable, which I really hate in a player. You know, it's the minimum we should expect is 100% effort. And yeah, I'd be shocked if we even saw 70 or 80% of effort out of it. Yeah, even when he was looking the part, he didn't seem like a guy that was busting a gut for you. And if Ange's going to play a pressing game, he's going to need a striker that's going to put some effort in. So, Eddie goes, you know, whatever kind of figure we get, it's not going to be the 40 million that was once talked about.
No.
If it's 15, 18 million, where do we go for there? What does that buy us these days? And, you know, there's rumours of a couple of boys in Japan looking to come over, but would they make the grade? And it's one of those ones, if Griffiths been let go, you've touched on it, you know he's 20 goals if you can get him playing. You know he's 20 goals in Scotland. The guys you bring in, you don't know if they're 10 goals in Scotland, never mind 20. So, yeah, you know, as much as we've talked about Ange and his teams are scoring enough goals and defence takes care of itself, Kenny needs somebody that's going to score the goals for us to do that.
Well, again, we spoke long and hard around the benefits he may be keeping Lee Griffiths. I'm going to come to Brian here because, you know, I've spoken about this time and time again, Brian, in relation to Lee Griffiths, and it was almost like, you know, that safe pair of hands, if you like. So I thought to myself, bring in maybe another striker, but we know that Edouard's leaving. Keep Lee Griffiths, because at the moment we've gone from having Klimala, Bayo, who was out on loan, Griffiths, Ayeti and Edouard, to Bayo and Ayeti. You know, probably 2 of the worst of the 5. I mean, how many goals does £5 million from an EPL side give you? Well, last season, what did Ayeti get last season? 6. So he didn't even hit double figures. So what Lawrence is saying is spot on. You've got a player in Lee Griffiths, and we know that you let the gaffer down, you let the club down, you let the supporters down because he wasn't fit enough, and he had to take ownership of that and take responsibility for that. But if he goes away and scores 20 goals, which he's done at every club, he's done it at Livingston, Dundee, he's done it at Hibs, he scored a goal every 2 games at Wolves, he's done it with Celtic. If he goes away and does that, how much money do we spend to replace a 20-goal a season striker?
Well, the thing with I'll just touch on Griffiths quickly because you've kind of covered it and I sort of agree. This is going to sound like a weird comparison, but I remember when Michael Owen played for Man United, and I think they got him in a free, and he'd had his injury problems. And Alex Ferguson, when he was asked about him, said, "Well, I can have him in my squad. He's not cost me anything, and he'll guarantee me 10 to 15 goals a season." Mm-hmm. Griffiths should have been the same. He's not costing us anything. You know he'll give you goals. His attitude might not be great. Fair enough. He might not be fit, whatever. He might have these issues, but he'll give you goals. Ayeti, for me, I actually think a manager could get a good tune at Ayeti. I think there's a player in there. I think he's got the attributes of a good player. But if we look at this through the optics of Ange Postecoglou's team, the way he wants his front players to move and run and power, that's not his game. So I think even if he had a good season last season, I think he'd be off. Bayo, no, don't kid me on. The boy Nesbitt, we should have got him in a month ago because I think he'll have a good Euros. I think he'll score a couple of goals. If he scores against England, you're not getting him for 2 million.
No.
You're just not. So, you know, it almost raises a bigger issue for me is the fact that how many times over the years has Celtic never had a striker in reserve, like a young striker coming through the ranks?
Absolutely.
Remember, the last player I remember that was a striker that came for the reserves that we called on was Mark Aitchison. Became the youngest player to score for Celtic, remember? And he went to Forest Green or something.
Forest Green, and is he not now at Barnsley?
Barnsley, something
He
like
went to Barnsley, yeah. Yep.
that. That was what he was 17, so it was about 5 years ago, something like that, 6 years ago. That was the last time we had an actual striker.
Yeah, Ronnie Dyler's last game. Was it Ronnie Dyler's last game?
No, he gave his debut, that's right.
Yeah, yep.
So, I mean, that's insanity. And it speaks to the bigger issue of the problems at Celtic just now.
Absolutely.
But I say, I have to agree with both of you. I think up front, you're basically starting from scratch. I think you're almost saying, right, get rid of every striker we've got and try and get 3 strikers in. You know, a complete back 4.
I
A
know.
couple of midfielders, a couple of wingers.
Possibly a goalie.
It's as unrealistic as it is difficult. I think I can't see that. I think there'll be a workaround. I think there'll be a lot of loan deals, free transfers, things like that, just to sort of pep up the squad. Maybe a few senior players coming to the end of their contracted places. We keep hearing about the Irish boy at Burnley. What was his name? His contract was running out. The winger we're always linked with. Robbie Brady. Is that him?
Right.
Guys like him, I think, will maybe come in. But again, are they a Postecoglou signing? Because I don't know if he knows much about Burnley. That's my other worry, is the transfers, because we don't have a head of recruitment. That's why I think a good head of recruitment is going to take at least 6 months to scout the markets we can use, bearing in mind Brexit, before they can give a manager a selection of targets. So that's why I think this season we'll be working off scraps until we get the people we want.
It is a situation and a half with 38 days to go. And this was the big gamble that we're talking about. Now, when you're looking at the scenario of a Celtic striker coming through the ranks, we've spoken about it as well, Brian. We went further back. We said, we had a great kind of tradition of producing strikers, but it stopped. So, I mean, go back to the 80s. The last great striker we produced in the 80s was Charlie Nicholas. You then look at the 90s, and by the way, we know it was a lot of doom and gloom, but the last striker we produced in the 90s was probably Jerry Craney. We then had Mark Burchill coming in, but his kind of light shone very, very briefly before he left the club. After that, you really are clutching. And a few commenters came in and said, what about Sean Maloney? Yeah, Maloney came in and scored goals. He wasn't an out-and-out striker, though, So, and obviously, Forrest has scored plenty of goals, but he's a right winger. And I just think it's something that, as you say, it's a more deep-rooted issue at Celtic Football Club. And we could have probably said the same in terms of centre-halves. Since Kennedy and McManus came through, we hadn't really produced anything. Welsh came in, and I know he's not a world beater, but I think he's done himself absolutely no harm in the last season, maybe getting 20 appearances under his belt. And it was the same with the goalies. That's why when Hazard came through, who was the last goalkeeper Celtic produced? We had fleeting appearances from a whole host of them. But, Stuart Kerr, maybe? Davy Marshall. And, not many. And then you ask yourself, how many of these players played more than 50 games for Celtic? So the whole youth structure is something that I hope is part of this restructure. So that's pretty grim. It's pretty grim reading, isn't it? When you look at that and you think, well, we're going to have at least 10 players, 10 first-teamers leaving the club. You can't bring 10 in one transfer window. So like you say, I think we will be seeing the likes of Nir Beaton playing in that first Champions League qualifier because of his experience. He will get a game. Probably at the back alongside Stephen Welsh. It was interesting, Lawrence, from the first address we got, not only from Ange Postecoglou, but also from Dominic Mackay, where he said that they had been talking about and discussing transfer targets for some time. Going back to what Brian says, are we just scrapping the head of recruitment? Is this going to be something that is done between the CEO and the manager? Who's actually identifying the players?
Listen, who knows, but part of the discussions coming as managers. But any manager's got to do his due diligence in Celtic and go, so this is where I think your squad's falling down. This is where we're short. And if I'm coming in, I want to bring... He must have favoured players that he fancy, 3 or 4, that these are guys that I want in because I think they can sort the problem. The manager that he's not going to be 100% relying on a head of recruitment. It's worrying that we don't have one and don't seem to know what we're doing with it. But surely the manager's got some players, whether it's 3 or 4, that he's identified and went, if I had a look at Celtic, these are boys that can improve. And unfortunately, it's not just improve the squad, it's improve the first team we need just now. Improving the squad would be a bit easier. The problem is we've got so many deficiencies in the first team. That's really where we need to improve. And that's what's going to be harder for the kind of money we're going to spend. You know, it's Ryan's touched on it. You know, it might be players coming to the end of their career, whether it's Robbie Brady, other people out there, you know, ending a contract. You might see a couple of them getting brought in. You know, there's been some whispers of some Man City boys get brought in. It's worked for us in the past, the City link. It's just been over reliant on it. You know, you're touching, when was the last time we produced a keeper, a striker, a centre half? Well, a lot of that's to do with had bloated squads with players that are sitting on big money that we buy for 2 or 3 million without a manager's knowledge. And they act as blockers to developing their own talent. So, you know, it's kind of a perfect storm of a rebuild here, isn't it? We're going, right, we now need to get 5 or 6 first teamers in. We need cover. Where's the cover going to come from? Because we really don't know kind of what's under the surface at Celtic just now. No reserve league, that they haven't really had a test as such where you can judge them if they're going to make that step up. Because the unders is too big a jump, I think, to be judging them up.
Oh, I think so, and I think we've seen that actually, you know, after the Dubai debacle, Brian, where we were forced to throw a lot of the kids in, and they certainly were not. I didn't think they looked first team ready, a lot of them, simply because they're not getting anything from maybe the age 18 to first team level to bridge the gap. It used to be bridged by the reserve league. One name that came to my mind when Lawrence was talking there about the blockers, and I totally agree with him. We've been bringing in blockers, you know, for years and years. One of the famous one, Marvin Compere. You know, Brendan Rodgers clearly didn't buy him because he only played him for 60 minutes against Greenock Morton in the Cup. And I'm not saying this guy should be signed by Celtic or is good enough to play for Celtic, but look at Jamie McCart. Look what Jamie McCart's done since he's left Celtic. He's won 3 domestic trophies. He's won 2 League Cups. He's won 1 Scottish Cup. And he's a first pick. He was at Celtic Park, but we didn't develop him from the youth player that he was. I think he was a captain of the youth team. Didn't develop him into a first team player, but he's went away and developed elsewhere. And he is a steady player at this level. We're not doing it. We're actually, I think we're investing something like £2.5 million in our youth development. But it seems to be, Brian, that we're supplying all these players to virtually every other club in Scotland. So when we're looking at the Colts team for next season, do you see it being more of an under-18s side at that level? And if so, do you think there's some kind of, disadvantages of that, of an 18-year-old playing at that level of Scottish football?
So first of all, just on your point about McCart, I mean, that's been a heroic season for him. I mean, the guy's won a lot of trophies. I actually think Stephen Gerrard sits with a Jamie McCart t-shirt on at night because he idolises him because he wins a lot. Show him a thing or two. Apart from that wee dig, one of the things that, in a sort of more positive way, I remember under Gordon Strachan, your defence was Gary Caldwell, who was at Hibs, and Steve McManus, who nobody heard of. And we went to Champions League last 16 twice. Darnell Day came through the ranks. So I think we had a good coaching setup and putting these boys in, you might find a few diamonds. Your question about the Colts in the under-18s, I think it's a huge advantage for these boys to be playing. Because if you're an 18-year-old winger and you're coming up against a left back that is a joiner midweek, a man's man, family man in his 30s, kicking you about the place, you're going to steady up quickly. You're going to adapt how to get around them. You're going to avoid playing up against them. You're going to strengthen your character. In any competitive game, a game of fives against your mates is more competitive than a reserve game. And I think if you look at any ex-player, they'll tell you the same. So I actually think it's a huge advantage to Colts. My issue with the Colts is, see if you're registered for the Colts and you're playing in League 2, say, can the first team call you up during the season? So say someone has we've got a centre mid and he's absolutely smashing it, and we think, oh, give this boy a game. Can we call him straight into the first team squad? Or
that's a good question. It's a good question. I've had a look on the site, the official site, to try and get all the.
It doesn't tell you. I have to check as
It's
well.
no clarifier at all, is it? Because as you say there, you imagine Celtic going into an important cup game or an important European game if we're still in Europe in a few months, and someone gets injured, and as you say, someone's tearing up trees, and you want to then transition them, even to sit on the bench. Sometimes that's what you need. It's not actually clear at this moment in time. And I'm not sure if it's something that they're still developing, Brian, as we go along. Will there be able to, will there be a cross-transference of players from that division into the Premiership? It remains to be seen. But, I think it's the first step in trying to develop the players. And I'm looking forward to next season. Lawrence will be covering the first team, the women's team and the Colts team. So you've got 3 Celtic teams to support, which is right up your street, Lawrence Connolly.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Listen, hopefully the women's do well in the Champions League and we get it under the disco lights because what a finish to the season they had. If I'm been for that draw with City, who knows what might have been. But yeah, it's interesting. Will we be able to drop people in and out, the Colts team into the first team? Because it looks like we're going to need to, aren't we? But we're going to be threadbare. We're cutting back. There's no doubt in that. And maybe the guys at the club are preparing for the effects of COVID, which is still to fully hit football teams. Because who knows how many fans are going to be allowed back in stadiums. If the fans aren't allowed back in stadiums, that's a killer finance-wise. And it won't just affect Celtic, that could be across the world. So, yeah, I think it's time for a slid down. We'd want to be able to drop people in and out. But it's interesting times, isn't it? Ange, he's not going to be in for 2 weeks. So Kennedy and Strachan get the players to the required level of fitness, which they couldn't do last season when we were looking at it. It didn't look particularly fit. Mm-hmm. Ange is going to want them fitter. That'll leave 3 weeks for Ange to prepare for the Champions League, mate. Betty's signings in. I'm assuming we'll be negotiating signings at the moment. Surely we're not going to wait for him to actually walk in the building to do that.
Well, Lawrence, waiting until the qualifiers are out the way before the players come in is something that we've seen in the past, so that remains to be seen. But one final question on the personnel side of things, Brian, I'll come to you first. The question of the captain. A lot of Celtic fans are just, taking it as a given that the captaincy will go to Callum McGregor. I look at McGregor, his figures have been incredible in terms of minutes played, games played over the last several seasons. Is it time to give him even more of a weight on his shoulders by giving him the captaincy? Do you think that would affect him in any way? Or should it go to someone else? I've seen a few suggestions out there. There aren't many, let's be honest. James Forrest, I think, shouldn't get it for the same reasons as McGregor, because although they lead by example, I don't know if their leaders as such are going to dig out of a hole. I can't really imagine them in the huddle giving that team talk before the kick-off. I thought Ayer had the leadership qualities, but he's on his way out. Somebody just yesterday suggested to me Chris Jullien. I'm not convinced with Jullien as a leader. I think there's been occasions where he has been spooked in games and ended up hiding. You can't do that if you're the captain. Where are we with regards to the captain? It's a bit of a concern for me. What do you think, Brian?
So I think that giving Callum the captaincy this season would be a mistake. The reason being, whoever's captain this season is following up from Scott Brown. Regardless of the opinion of Scott Brown, he's one of the greatest ever captains. He's one of the most honoured captains of Scottish football. If you're following that up and you fail, that's big shoes to fill. So imagine being manager of Celtic and then having to fill in Scott Brown. Being captain of Celtic, imagine, following Scott Brown. It's so much expectation. I think what they'll do is they'll bring someone in to be captain. I think they'll probably bring someone in that they think can be captain, at least for a season. Mm-hmm. And then once see how this season goes, and then maybe pass it to Callum if he's still there. But I think the right thing to give it just now, there's too much over-reliance on Callum anyway, and it costs. I think you can see in his performance that dwindled last season. It's maybe because Lennon was feeding him iron brewing pizzas, to be fair, but...
and not giving him a game plan.
Aye, not telling him what to do. So I think it'd be harsh at this stage. In terms of the current squad, the reason I think it has to be someone bringing in is because I just don't see anyone as a standout captain. I know we Forrest He's done well and stuff, but is he going to be? I mean, guys like him and McGregor might set examples by how they train and how they play, but we need someone to be yelling at people and bringing people on and encouraging them and communicating game plans, and especially if Postecoglou is completely changing the way we play.
Yeah,
he has to have a real strong on-field communicator, and it would make sense to me to be a centre half. But again, I don't think I like Julian. I like his attitude, but he gets too caught up in the physicality of things. He wants to always turn it into a battle, and a lot of times that's one of the big fella's game. You know, he's good in the air, he's solid, but he's no a brutish defender by any means. And I think he gets distracted and a bit wound up easily. So yeah, I think we're going to have to bring someone in. I don't think anyone in the current squad. It's not that they're not fit to be captain, but to be captain of Celtic and to be captain of Celtic after Scott Brown, not for me.
We've lost a lot of leaders at the football club, Lawrence, and none more so than Scott Brown. What do? Do you go with a new man coming in, as Brian suggested, or is there somebody in there that you think has the qualities? I think that they might default to Callum McGregor, but I think that would be a mistake.
I think you've touched on it. We've lost a lot of leaders, you know. Boyata, Tierney, Brown, Lustig, all captain material. All of them, every single one. All leaders on the park.
Even Foster.
Foster. They're going to lose big Chris Ayer, leader on the park. Who's the leaders on the park now that's left in that squad that actually would lead? Even Johnny Hayes, to an extent, was a leader on the park, you know what I mean? His commitment, his drive. Where is it in the current team? So, you know, it's not just captain, we're real depth of leaders in that team.
Yeah, you're right. You look at the great Celtic sides, there was a captain, but there was a few others who could have quite easily been the captain. You know, you think of the 80s when you've got a team full of people like Roy Aitken, Tommy Bonds, Danny McGrain and Pat Bonner. I mean, there's 4 captains right there. And then, Murdo McLeod. All these guys could have been captains. And you're struggling to actually pinpoint a candidate who is an absolute given to be Celtic's new captain. And again, I think that's indicative of the season that we've just had and the last couple of years at Celtic Football Club. We've already mentioned the backroom team. Some say that he's going to bring his own in. The chat we've been hearing is that John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan are part of that team. I take what Lawrence says, Brian, about that pair last season. They were part of that capitulation. They're working with the players every single day on the training pitch. Players who, you know, Ajeti and Griffiths, were still waiting on for them to get fit for last season. They're still no fit, and we're in June. They were unfit for an entire season. Now, that's down to a lot of different areas of the football club, you know, with the diet and the conditioning and all that, absolutely. But these guys were part of that problem last season. And the likelihood is, because we're preparing for the pre-season games and then a Champions League qualifier, these 2 guys will still be involved. What's your thoughts on that?
So first of all, I just want to caveat what I'm about to say before I get slaughtered on Twitter. I think they should have been thrown out with Lennon. They should have left the same time as Lennon. They should have left at the end of this season. They're still there. What I do want to say though is, I know the players were unfit and they were the coaches, but they weren't the fitness coaches, they weren't the sports scientists, they weren't the things in place that Brendan Rodgers had in place. And if you're judging Kennedy on player performance over the course of his tenure, you can't write off everything he done under Brendan Rodgers, everything he done in Lennon's first season, because last season was terrible. So I agree he was part of the problem, but I don't think he was the problem. I think, I touched on it in a kind of joking way, but I think the complete lack of professionalism in the squad was a huge issue to fitness. I think the lack of a modern football backroom staff in terms of physios, fitness experts. I mean, Brendan Rodgers, when he was there, was getting people measured for body fat every week. You know, if anyone was over a certain degree, they didn't get a game. Lennon, by all accounts, is not even giving them the tactics. So I think actually what you might have found is maybe if John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan weren't there, it could have been worse. It might not be, but it could have been. And I think as well, in regards to Postecoglou coming in, maybe his backroom team that he's worked with in Japan didn't want to travel from Japan and relocate their families to Scotland. It may be in the case that I actually don't. from what I've seen, I don't think he's been told, this is your staff, get on with it. It just doesn't seem like that type of character. It doesn't. I think what he's done is they've said to him, look, these are the guys that are in place. Do you want to interview them and see how you feel about them? And if he's chatted to them, because bear in mind as well, John Kennedy, he done a very bad impression of it, but he did try and imitate Brendan Rodgers in terms of the passing, the pressing, that type of attitude. Given how Postecoglou is supposed to play, I can see why he would want him as part of his backroom staff. Especially because he knows the players already, and by all accounts, I don't think we saw it during his games in charge, but the players apparently really like him. So it might be good for Postecoglou to have him in place. And that's it as a link. And the thing is as well, Postecoglou might come in, have 8 months with him, and decide he's not his man, and pick him off. So there's that to remember. So I don't think it's going to be a popular opinion. And anyone that's about to give me abuse on Twitter, just relax, put your phone down. I get it. But I actually think it's quite good that Kennedy and Stacken will be there for at least the beginning, because I think he needs it. I think for all the stuff he has to do, the massive squad rebuild we've talked about, the massive internal shifting, director of footballs, physios, whatever, and navigate Champions League qualifiers in less than 40 days. If you add in trying to find his own backroom staff and they're relocating from Japan or start fresh, it's not going to work. So I actually think it's much necessity in terms of desire. Yeah. But I will say I don't think the backroom team's been thrust upon him. I think he's been offered the chance if he wanted them, and I think he said yes, which is a big difference for Lennon, basically getting told what to do.
Listen, I think what you've done there, Brian, is offered a great deal of balance with regards to the part of the problem, get rid of them. But I also constantly go on about continuity, contingencies, with regards to the playing staff, and I don't think that there has been many in the way of contingencies. What happens if your right winger gets injured early in the season? Oh well, we don't have a winger. And that's been Celtic's kind of game plan. This time round, if someone was to come in with a brand new backroom staff, as you say, you've not only got one guy trying to learn the club, learn the game, learn the country, get acclimatised to the country. You've got a whole team. Now, we know that some of the big managers, the elite managers, bring a staff of 12, 17. We've heard up to 17 staff. At this moment in time, Celtic simply can't do that. There's been far too much upheaval. So I totally get that. I don't think it's going to be a popular decision, but I think Celtic will do it, Lawrence, with that in mind. If that's the case, do you think that there will also be an internal switch in personnel from perhaps one of the youth teams or someone behind the scenes into the coach team? Because I've heard a couple of guys being linked to that job. I don't think we're going to be bringing in too many new faces where we can save a wage, if you like, and actually swap someone from perhaps an underage team at Celtic, move them into the coach team.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like Celtic to do it cheap with it. If there's an option that costs us money and an option that costs us nothing, what are we going to do? Well, maybe it could be good. It's building continuity in. I mean, as much as Lenny complained about his background staff being foisted upon him, he also said that Kennedy was very, very good. So I'm not too sure how Lenny kind of go, he's terrible at getting, but it was very, very good. You're kind of going, well, what's it there? We do, nice touch it. We need continuity. There's no way that Ange can kind of come in and do all this in 3 weeks when he lands. I know we'll be working in video analysis at the moment. They should be getting the fitness fit, though. I'm assuming Celtic have measured body fat and VO2 max of players that are still here, or as soon as they get back to training and they've got their goals, what they want their VO2 max and their body fat to be, probably for 10 yards, their big tests, whatever going on. So all that could be done at distance to get them fit in 2 weeks, you would think. They'll have an underlying level of fitness. That it's going to leave 3 weeks, get to know a new backroom staff or who already know the environment he's in, try and persuade people to come and learn everything from scratch. I think Price touched. So you might see him bringing his staff throughout his tenure, or people starting to join throughout his tenure. I think he'd done that. He started bringing his staff in. Not everybody joined the day one remark, did they? They were led in. So it could be something that we're looking at. As much as Kennedy didn't impress anyone with his cameo. You were looking and going, geez, have you really tried anything different? But a lot of that was, I think we've touched on, it was pretty poor squad management, weak in the wings. So what were his options? Well, we had 3 number 10s and we managed to get all of them on the park for most of the season in the same game, which was, we could repeatedly say it didn't work. I think Lenny's came in and went, oh, Ryan Christie's best position is number 10. You're like, right, but we all kind of knew he was at right winger, but we were struggling because of that. So, a lot to do, mate. And I think Ryan's right, it's keep them and then let Ange have a look at them and see how they work. And he's got to suss out, can he work with them or not? If it's going to be successful or not, and if it's not, change them out. For the Colts team, we've kind of heard rumours of John Hughes, and now there's rumours it's going to be someone internally. Now that person internally, if they're showing promise, and they take on board Ange's instructions, because I'm sure Ange is going to be saying, this is the way the Colts team has got to play, because they've got to step in here. I need you to be able to follow that, and that's how the tactics are going to be. It could be a smart move, but time will tell.
Time will tell. One final subject to cover, and this bleeds into the fans. I mean, over the last season, and I said this last season, we've been blamed for a hell of a lot, Brian, particularly from Neil Lennon. And I'm pretty sure, a whole host of other people think it's in some way attributable to the fans that Celtic season fell off the edge of a cliff. I would suggest that the fans are the only factor of the club that didn't fail the club. People might say, oh, but what about what happened after Ross County? Really, over an entire season, one tiny flashpoint outside the ground, I'm sorry, you can't hang the Celtic support over that. So the fans are very unhappy with various aspects of the club at the moment, none more so than the boardroom. Now, we've seen the banners coming up, counting down the days. They had, I'm pretty sure, a few other banners ready, waiting in the wings. And then the final one, not fit for purpose. And there was images of every boardroom member. I think it was telling that many people, Brian, online didn't recognise a lot of those faces that were appearing on the banner. I think that speaks volumes for the manner in which this board have been anonymous for a number of years. Now, on the one side, I would say, well, they were being led in many ways by a very, very strong CEO in Peter Lawwell. And to be honest with you, he cast quite a long and dark shadow on the rest of the boardroom, to be quite frank. I mean, he was the figurehead, wasn't he? Making decisions, and it was always him and Dermot Desmond. And we know that officially decisions, CEOs can be taken to task. How much of that was happening in the boardroom, who knows? Is it time for us to reevaluate the makeup of that boardroom? Do we require far more diversity, far more creativity? And do you think it's a bit unfair at the moment, some of the flack that Don Mackay's getting? I mean, he was part of that big banner campaign, wasn't he?
The flack that Don Mackay's getting is poor. The guy's not started the job yet. If we get to, like it's the same with Ange Postecoglou, if we get to this time next year and Postecoglou's been playing a 1-3-6 formation with James Forrest in goals and Dominic Mackay's not been buying any players, then we can criticise. At this stage, the guy's not in a job, so to do that, it just gives other outlets ammunition to attack the Celtic fans. In terms of the board, yeah, I think any board always needs diversity of thought, diversity of colour, diversity of background, diversity of gender. It always needs that to function successfully at any level. Doesn't matter if it's Celtic, doesn't matter if it's football. It always needs diversity. I just want to touch on your point about the fans and fan media. So fan media gets a lot of stick. ACSOM gets a lot of stick. And I think it's terrible. The reason being, the conversations that we had today, we would be having in the pub, wouldn't be any different. It's not agenda driven. We've all different points of view. And actually people being able to sit, I know for myself, watching shows like this, engaging with fan media, has been a release that we've not had during lockdown. Mm-hmm. Now, you saw how frustrated and pent up people got during lockdown. That's why the Ross County thing happened with the fans, because they had no other way of expressing themselves. Fan media allows that. It allows people to actually hear these conversations and chat about them and engage with them. Now, yeah, Celtic fans will fight amongst ourselves, no literally the way other clubs fans do, but they will argue amongst ourselves. But what unites us all is that we love the club. So see everyone that's on Twitter now and disagrees with me, Paul or Lawrence, and wants to call each other names, just remember, we all love the club. We all want what's best for the club. And that's what unifies us. There's a reason Celtic fans are the best in the world. There's a reason for it, and it's because of how passionate we are about the club and how well we support it. Yeah, I get it's been divisive this season. Yeah, I get everyone's been arguing, but lockdowns are a part of that. And I think it's about time people come together and stop fighting amongst ourselves, because there's so many more battles we're going to face this season, and we have to just stick together, get behind the team, and get behind each other. And actually, if you disagree with someone, brilliant. But don't be calling them names. Just disagree. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, listen, if that had come from the official channel, Brian, I would have been full of hope for the coming season. Well said, mate. And I agree with that. Yeah, there's been a lot of nonsense written. And as I, disagree with us. I mean, no one on this channel thinks they're right every single time. I mean, Mark Hughes might not have been a great manager for Celtic. Not everybody's going to agree. But don't get abusive because, some people can take it, others can't. And again, with the lockdown, Brian, people are vulnerable. So sometimes that fragility can be pushed over the edge just with certain words that are used that might trigger doubts in their own mind, and it could be the root of something that goes wrong in their life. So absolutely brilliant. Good words. Lawrence Conley, it's been a pleasure on Saturday afternoon to chat to you, sir. And our newest recruit, Brian, and hopefully we can do this far more often on A Celtic State of Mind. Thanks everybody for getting involved. We're looking ahead to a new era at Celtic Football Club, and A Celtic State of Mind will cover it every step of the way. Join us again on Monday at 12:30. Thanks for joining us on A Celtic